All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome, to another Ask Me Anything session. I'm here today with some fine folks from the SAFE Alliance. We have Michelle Schwartz, aka Shell. We have Autumn King, and we have Sophie Benitez. Welcome, y'all.
Thank
Hey,
you.
thanks for having
Thank
us.
you. So today we're going to be holding a conversation about survivors with disabilities and increasing accessibility. Excuse me, y'all. And just so y'all know, reminder, if you've never watched or come to an AMA, ask me anything. You can put your questions in the chat or on the stream and we can share it. This is a conversation, so please feel free if you have any questions. Are y'all ready to get started?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, cool. So, what is SAFE and what does the Disability Services Program do with the agency?
So thank you, Courtney, for asking. The SAFE Alliance is a merger of Austin Children's Shelter and Safe Place. Both are longstanding and respected human service agencies in Austin, serving the survivors of child abuse, sexual assault and exploitation, and domestic violence. SAFE is dedicated to ending violence through prevention initiatives, advocacy for survivors and individuals at risk for victimization, as well as providing a range of services for individuals, families, and communities that have been affected by violence and abuse. SAFE is home to an on-site 24-hour hotline with available text and chat features. SAFE also includes emergency shelter services, children's services, supportive housing, advocacy, counseling, peer support, and case management. SAFE also provides prevention and education services through programs like community advocacy, community education, deaf services, Expect Respect, and the Disability Services Program. So our program, Disability Services, was first established in 1996. We began our work at the forefront of identifying and giving voice to actually the needs to start a movement to end violence against people with disabilities. No one was looking at that, doing anything about the violence that was happening in the lives of people with disabilities. And so today we work to create change within the disability service areas and the places where people with disabilities are living, where they're working, where they're spending their days. Some of the ways that we do that is to provide opportunities and options for prevention education and to prevent abuse. That can include providing training for youth and adults with disabilities. And I would say primarily on healthy relationships and safer sexuality, as well as providing education and training and support to the people that are in their everyday lives. For example, teachers, parents, other family members, peers, law enforcement, legal and medical professionals, and then a broad range of disability service providers. I think we most enjoy collaborating with community partners in Austin and Travis County and work with them and enjoy working with them to identify and then to address gaps in their services that are related to violence prevention and healing and justice for survivors with disabilities. So that's the really big picture.
That's quite a roadmap. All right, thank you. So with that, I know you talked more in depth about the Disability Service Program and how long it's been around. A question I have for you is, what are the unique barriers and vulnerability of the survivors you serve?
Yeah. I think that's a good question. Do you all mind if I go first?
Yes, please.
That's okay. Awesome. Well, I think one of the big ones that I think about when I think about the barriers and vulnerabilities of survivors with disabilities is a lot of the way that society thinks. And so there's something that we kind of talk about often in disability services about the social model versus the medical model of looking at disability. And when we look at those two different models, I'll kind of explain them just a little bit. But in the medical model of disability, the physical or the cognitive disability itself is the problem. Whereas like if you're in the social model of disability, the way that society is organized is the problem, and society is inaccessible. So in that medical model, a person with a disability needs to be like fixed by like medical intervention or cured of the disability, or like changed to be as close to the idea of able as possible. And in that medical model, it prioritizes that assimilation, and it puts like the responsibility on the person with a disability to adjust to society like as it exists. And so that's like the way that I think a lot like of our society is built, right, is by that medical model. And so the social model is the opposite of that. It's kind of like what we try to lean towards in disability services. And that's the social model, which that responsibility lies within society, not the individual. So the problem is not the disability itself, but the barriers that are created by society, like the inaccessible physical spaces, or maybe the prejudice towards people with physical and cognitive disabilities, and just overall the lack of universal design. And that is a concept allowing universal access. So when you think about like the accessibility of ramps versus stairs, or like the height of a sink or an ATM, the availability and like placement of Braille or even audio assistance. And so I think in that social model of disability, it's society that needs to change to become more accessible for all people, young and old, regardless of disability. So when I think of like the biggest barrier to survivors with disabilities, it's that mindset. And that can change a lot of things. And so, I think it's something that not a lot of people might think about. And I think that falls into ableism as well. And so I think that's one of the biggest barriers is ableism, and that social thinking of, they need to conform to what society already has, not society needs to make itself more accessible. And so I think that's one of the biggest ones that like I want to touch on first, because I think not a lot of us know that, right? Like I don't feel like that's common knowledge, and a lot of the times ableism might even be left out of a lot of the isms that we do talk about. And so I think it's really important to think like, okay, how can we start to include this ism in the ones that we're talking about that are so important, so that we can include people with disabilities who have been underserved and really not looked at in society, right? So that's one of the big ones, along with some of the things that I think might be more obvious, like communication barriers, right? Whether that's like a communication device or lack thereof, right? Or the accessibility to those devices. And then a couple other ones like I just talked about in those examples, the physical barriers, and like transportation barriers. There's a lot that goes on with that, and not to take up like too much time, but I think the last one that I really want to talk about is like the policies that every agency or organization has in place that might not allow for people with disabilities to have the supports that they need and also receive services. And so I think that's a really big barrier too, is like looking at our policies, like not only our societal like mindset, but like our policies as well. And I'll stop there and let everyone else share before I like dive off into more.
Yes, that's good, Autumn.
Sophie, I do have some stuff to share, but Sophie, I'm going to defer to you.
Okay. I think barriers could include limited English proficiency, immigrant survivors, immigration status, and issues related to economic dependency on the perpetrator, among others. Another major barrier could be service providers who have limited resources and skills to appropriately respond to immigrant survivors' unique needs. For individuals with disabilities, there are additional and unique challenges. Some of the strategies that are available to other survivors to plan for safety may not be an option for the individual with a disability, like getting in a car and driving to a safe location. If a situation escalates for survivors who are reliant on a caregiver, it is very common for people who abuse to fill that role. In this situation, it might be difficult for a survivor to imagine how to get their basic needs met if they leave, or if their partner finds out that they are seeking support. finding accessible transportation may be a challenge. Entering the office may not be possible or as easy without readily available interpretation or accessibility solutions for individuals with physical disabilities, and finding support, people who are knowledgeable in both domestic violence and specific disabilities could be difficult. The survivors are vulnerable of their perpetrator going to the shelter to try to find them. We have many high alerts at SAFE of survivors, perpetrators posing a risk to the shelter to try to find the survivors.
Thank you, Sophie.
So you actually covered a lot of things that I was going to say. So I'll be able to go really quickly through what I, in thinking about this question, it's like, what I want to mention is information, the lack of information. This creates huge risks for violence. And I think especially information about what kind of treatment constitutes abuse, what's okay, what's not okay. And the fact that victim services even exist in our communities. Historically, survivors with disabilities are much less likely to have people in their everyday lives that will know how to respond to them when they do make an outcry, or when there are signs and indicators, or, simply say, I believe you. I also think that people with disabilities who especially have high support needs may have limited power to control their time, their access to communication, to come and go at will, which impacts access to services like sexual assault evidence collection, medical care, sexual assault follow-up, emergency shelter, if their abuser is where they live, healing services like counseling, support groups, resources, advocacy, and other victim services that we provide through our agency within the community. I think I would like the biggest picture for me is just access to knowledge and access to the power to get help if and when they need.
That's a lot, y'all. So with that, I know y'all all work in disability services. So what preventative resources do you all have for people with disabilities?
We have the resource of the My Rights, My Life curriculum. The My Rights, My Life curriculum has 4 units, 30 classes in total, and some of the classes topics are consent, boundaries, relationship tools, and internet safety, getting to know someone and dating, safer sexuality, and healthy and unhealthy relationships, and leadership for safer relationships. The My Rights, My Life curriculum is free at no cost for everyone to use, and the curriculum was developed for transition age students 18 plus with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but we are working on getting the curriculum modified to be appropriate for high school age students.
Awesome.
Yeah. And I think, I think that curriculum kind of speaks back to, what Michelle was talking about, that lack of access to information, and just that information not being out there. Right. And so I think Sophie brings up a good point talking about the curriculum as like a preventative resource, because we talk about how it's really important for youth and young adults with disabilities to understand healthy relationships and safer sexuality. So that way we can have that information that Michelle was like talking about in our last question, right? So I feel like on top of that, something I also want to mention is kind of a training that Sophie and I are working on. So the curriculum just recently got developed and published, which is really exciting. And so Sophie and I, like they just mentioned, we're trying to bring that down into the high school age as well, so that we can expand kind of where that curriculum goes and how many people have access to that curriculum, right? And just kind of really expanding that project. But on top of that, we also, if we want to think about, like, if we're giving education and materials to our youth and young adults with disabilities, we also want to and need to give support to the surrounding community with information and materials to support the skills and strengthening factors that we're trying to solidify for our community in order to lower that rate of violence against people with disabilities. And in that that surrounding community, we call it the wraparound community. And so the wraparound community can be any person who's in the daily life of a person with a disability. So that looks like parents, that looks like caregivers, any family, friends, peers. It can be service providers. It can be a whole bunch of people. And so the wraparound community is something that we're really looking at. And so Sophie and I are also doing wraparound trainings where we go in and we talk about these things, right? Like what do we need to know? What are the things that our community is needing in order to support our community of people with disabilities, and in order to help them have a safer and healthier, healthier life with their relationships, right? So that's another resource that Sophie and I are specifically working on, as well as working with that curriculum as well.
Nice. So with knowing like y'all have something in the works and something that was recently created, y'all partially already touched on this when talking about the barriers, but what inspired the development of the curriculum?
Oh my gosh. So this is where I get really excited and may get a little bit on my soapbox. So take me down if you need. Okay. We recognize that youth and adults with disabilities are at higher risk for all of the things that have been brought up so far. Their perpetrators are most likely someone that they know and should have every right to trust. And many people with disabilities are not receiving education or information that's designed to help reduce their risk for violence and exploitation unless something happens in a home, in a schoolroom, in a service center, in a rehabilitation program. Something happens, we get a call. Could you come and do some training on, whatever the issue is? So we know that people with disabilities are not receiving that education and information that can help reduce their risks of violence. So I would say SAFE's inspiration for My Rights, My Life curriculum was a belief that we could develop resources that provide information on healthy relationships, meaningful and safer relationships, and that we could share that information with the wraparound community that Autumn was talking about, with educators, with family members, disability service providers, for the purpose of reducing risks. I personally was inspired by recognizing that our education and our service systems for youth and adults with disabilities have not been successful, in protecting or reducing the risks of sexual and other forms of violence by filtering out or withholding information on relationships, on sexuality, and on sex as part of our health education or as part of their social and emotional learning opportunities. I also recognize that parents and providers and educators, may be afraid. We may be afraid of suggesting sexual thoughts, sexual feelings, or sexual activities when sex education is provided or relationship education is provided, or that the education will cause the person with the disability to think about something they hadn't thought about before or feel something that they hadn't felt before that could be harmful. But as one disability service provider shared recently in a series of listening sessions, everybody's doing it, but nobody's talking about it, right? So I would say that my inspiration is believing that people with disabilities have the right to talk about it with their parents, with their teachers, and their peers. I believe everybody has the right to accurate information about all levels of relationships and to have opportunities to do this, to ask questions, to make choices, to advocate for what's really important to them, to identify what's okay and what's not okay in their relationships, to set boundaries, to say no, and to say yes, even an excited yes. So that's my inspiration. And I was so thrilled that I do need to make a mention of our funder here, the Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, through a grant from the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Department of Health and Human Services in Washington, funded our efforts to develop the My Rights, My Life curriculum. But I also need to state the disclaimer that doesn't necessarily mean that within the curriculum we're representing the official views nor the endorsement by a federal source. But it's been an amazing opportunity, and I can't wait for people to go to the link and dig into it and just see really what's there. The other thing I do want to mention is that we had a couple of really amazing folks on staff that were able to develop this. Megan Westmore, who's now in a doctoral program, and Heidi Lurch were the authors of this amazing curriculum. We all contributed, but they were the movers and shakers and folks that came on board and actually made this dream happen. So I want to make sure we mention and thank them also. Now I'll get off my soapbox.
It's all good. And just so folks know, at the end of the session, coming probably tomorrow or next week, there will be an email that will include the link to the My Rights, My Life curriculum. Y'all be sure to check it out. Autumn, Sophie, do y'all have anything you would like to add to that question, or y'all?
I think just with like the inspiration of it, I think it's really great to hear the background from you, Michelle. And then I think I just want to mention that, you know, like Sophie and I were talking about earlier with just like the resources, you know, it's developed for 18 plus currently. And then Sophie and I are working to bring that into high school development, right? And kind of then the long-term goal is to take that curriculum that's developed and bring it all the way down into kindergarten, so that these skills and like strengthening protective factors start to build up from a very young age. Because I know for me, it would have been really helpful. And I think it would have been awesome if we could have had these conversations starting at a really young age, so that I really built some of those skills within me and just within the people that I know and grew up around, you know, that we could have had a lot of access to that information. And so that's the goal with this curriculum too, is like looking at kind of where it was inspired from and why the development began with, and then also looking like long-term, you know, creating this material to be accessible all the way down into really young ages. So that way it just starts to compound on itself and really solidify, because I think those are really important, right? Like, I don't feel like any of us are ever too old or too young to learn about these things. And I think a lot of the times we just haven't. And that's for people with disabilities out. And so I think it's really important to know that, you know, that's kind of like our long-term goal with it. For everyone, you know, people with or without disabilities. So I know for me, just being a part of the curriculum in a small way, I brag on it, because I'm like, wow, as a young adult, like I learned so many things for myself that I was never taught. And it's just a really cool way to kind of bring up these topics and have these conversations, because they can be hard and they can be difficult based on what everyone grew up and experienced. And so, yeah, I think it's a really proud resource that I love to be a part of. And I really encourage people to kind of dig in, whether that's for themselves or someone that they know. And yeah, that we have really big plans with this. That's really exciting.
And I wanted to add that recently, like school districts before this year and COVID, when we were going easily into the school districts, and now like community partners, they're both getting to choose which classes they want us to present. And so they have like access in that way to be able to modify the classes by choosing which classes and the information that they want us to present.
Oh, thanks, y'all. So I want to take the moment. It's all good. First, I want to start with saying, if you have any questions, y'all, post them in the comments. We want to hear from you, what questions you may have for these fine folks from SAFE. Thanks, y'all. And while we wait for questions, I have a question not at all related to the topic. So, my question for you is, what is your favorite holiday tradition? And it can be any holiday.
Oh.
No specific holiday. And I'll tell you about this while you marinate on this. I do a thing called Motown Meals, soul food for the holidays with my friends. Literally spin Motown records, and I fry up catfish and we hang out. Yeah. So it's one of my things I look forward to every year. Someone want to kick it off?
My favorite holiday tradition is opening presents on Christmas Day, and also like the chilly weather in December, spending time with family on Christmas, seeing the pretty lights, decorating the Christmas tree.
Love it.
Yeah, I think I have two. I was just trying to think about it. It's funny because you say tradition, and I was like, well, do we do anything like traditionally? Like, like what's something that we do every year? Well, it's so interesting, the timing of all this. But anyways, we're having our second Friendsgiving this weekend, which is so exciting because I have this like really awesome group of people that I grew up with that we're all still bizarrely close, even though we don't all talk every day. And so it's a really cool thing where there's about 30 of us that I think are showing up. And that's like everyone's new families and things where we've all grown up and kind of become adults in our own ways. And so it's going to be really cool to do that. This is our second annual one. So we're kind of pushing for this to be like a yearly annual thing. And that's really exciting. And then I think the other one, just because I love quality time with people. But I think the other one is that my husband and I, we, during the pandemic, we were like, well, what do we do? All of our traditions kind of got mixed around and we weren't able to do a lot of the things that we would have normally. And so we just discovered that we really love car camping and going out and seeing national parks and kind of just like being in nature when a lot of things might, be geared towards like, I want to say like more material. That's not what I mean. We just were like, you know what? We want to get out. We want to go and we want to go see nature. We want to spend time just ourselves. We want to put away all the devices. We want to put away all the thoughts of, all the things that just bombard our daily lives, like money and whatever. And we were like, let's just go enjoy nature. And so we tend to do that around the holidays as well. And that's been a really fun tradition to start too. So a lot of it's around quality time for me, I think lately.
Nice. Shell.
Okay, so mine will be really quick. I love during holidays when it's evening, it's night, it's cold outside, and I'm sitting near a fireplace and there's a tree up and lights and there's candles or something somewhere that smells like gingerbread or cinnamon, and sitting there having like a really hot drink with people that I really care about, family and friends. I mean, I can do that night after night after night during holiday season. And it's like, that doesn't take a whole lot, doesn't take a whole lot to make me happy and during holidays. Give me a sofa and a drink and a fireplace and lights and I'm good.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember the actor's name, but Ron Swanson has a video of him just sitting by the fire drinking a drink. It's literally the whole video.
Yeah. We did put our Christmas tree up last night, so it's official in this house. So I got a little excited. So we already have the tree and the lights, and I sat there last night on the couch doing the exact same thing. So I agree with that.
Love it. All right, I'm checking to see. I don't see any questions from folks watching. If you do end up having a question, please feel free to add. We're going to go ahead and continue on until then. So I think last question for y'all. What are some ways to increase access for survivors with disabilities?
So do y'all mind if I speak to this one? Okay. So I think I think this one is really interesting. So I think taking a look into the barriers that we mentioned kind of at the beginning of the AMA, right? Like we want to be able to look at those barriers and those vulnerabilities and like ask ourselves, are we contributing to those barriers, or are we actively making sure that we're bringing access in, whether that's into your programs or into like products and developments? And so when we think about accessibility, it's really important to start thinking about it at the beginning of a project, from like the idea to the development to the way to the finished product or service. And in some of those, I think one of those ways is like doing needs assessment in programs to determine if there are supports already in place or if there needs to be supports put in place to serve survivors with disabilities. And then I think one way, just in disability services, that we have kind of always tried to increase accessibility in our materials and services is by bringing in self-advocates to give that input and give that feedback into the work that we're doing, from those initial ideas to the production, to the piloting, to the adjusting, to the, through all those different stages of producing materials or services. So that way it really is community and disability focused, right? Because I think if you have that feedback from self-advocates that can say, hey, actually, this is going to be way more helpful, right? And you get that experience from your community saying, like, I think, let's pull in all of our different strengths. Let's pull in everything that, we might bring to the table and put that into our work is really helpful in increasing that accessibility for survivors with disabilities.
Thank you, Autumn.
And then if anybody else, I don't know if anybody else thinks that one. That was my spiel.
I do have some, but I'm going to wait. Sophie, if you have anything. It's okay if you don't.
Yeah, it's all good.
There's nothing that can come to my mind of
Okay.
what are ways to increase access for survivors with disabilities.
Okay, can I have your time then?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, when I was talking about inspiration, I've been with Safe Place a little bit, and I've been observing people with disabilities experiencing abuse for a long time. And in the beginning, there was a need to start a movement. And then we've spent a great deal of time now creating resources, creating information, and sharing and educating to increase awareness in our communities and in the various places where people with disabilities are living, where they're working, where they're going for spending their days. And that's been really important. But for some of the reason that I talked about earlier, access to time, access to transportation, access actually to free will to do many things. There are many people with disabilities that cannot access our services. So I think, for me anyway, I think our next wave of work is to figure out how, as a community, as an agency that serves our community, we're able to go where people are, doing something more holistic in terms of healing and doing something that's maybe more mobile than we have in the past. I think that's where we go next in our work. I'm not real sure exactly how it's going to happen, or who. Yeah, I really don't know. I just know that we've educated so many folks with disabilities that can't come to us for those wonderful support groups, for individual therapeutic sessions, for peer support, a number of the really rich services that we can offer and do offer our community. So I think in terms of accessibility, that's where I see us, or at least that's where I'm wanting to see us go next.
Nice. Thank you. So with considering how to expand reach and be able to support survivors with disabilities better, we wanted to flip the question on our audience. I know it's okay if y'all don't have the answer, but we are curious to know what has been effective with your agencies to help service folks with disabilities. So you have two ways to answer this question. If you feel like you would like to put it in the comments, we'll share it. But if not, like I said, at the end of this session, I will be sending a follow-up email where we have a survey and you can answer what y'all are doing or what y'all are seeing in order to support survivors with disabilities. I'm not seeing anything in the comments. So all good. Final thoughts, y'all, before we wrap this up?
Thank you for having us, and thanks for everyone being a part of the conversation. I think it's really such a cool avenue and a really cool platform to kind of talk about these things and discuss just different topics. So we really appreciate the space to have these conversations today. And yeah, I just want everyone to know that like we're here for conversation. We're always open to talking and seeing how we can be a part of collaborating or helping or trying to figure it all out together. So I think that's what's really cool about doing these things. So we just appreciate the space. So thank you.
So I would second that. Thank you so much, Courtney. And then thank you, Laura, for making this happen. And thank you, TASA, for creating a forum like this. We really, really appreciate it.
I also second that. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the AMA.
Well, thanks to all of y'all for being here, and thank you for sharing the curriculum. Thanks, folks who are joining us live, and thanks for folks who are watching it after. We appreciate y'all, and we'll catch you on the next Ask Me Anything. See y'all later.
Bye.
All right.